are looking into 4 areas. One is hijacking, 2, sabotage, 3, psychological problem of the passengers and crew, and 4, personal problem among the passengers and crew.
Officials still baffled with this missing 777 jet that went down on Friday evening. 239 people aboard, and none of them, including the aircraft, found at this point. Robert Kokonis is here to break this down for me. You're an airline analyst. You've covered a lot of these planes. You know intimately the 777, even Malaysian Airlines.
I have flown on this identical airliner with Malaysia Airlines, so it is a mystery. How do you have a $200 million plus jet just vanish? That's the mystery. And I think the challenging part, and you're listening to the executive from Malaysia Airlines talking about it could be sabotage, it could be terrorism, there could be a malfunction of the plane, could be an issue with the crew. There was an Egypt Air plane where arguably one of the pilots put the airplane down in a suicide attempt. But all those scenarios doesn't quite explain how it could just disappear from radar. Perhaps a mid-air explosion, that would be but the only item, but again, no debris found at this point.
Now, we have had airlines in the past, the Air France jet a few years back, an Indonesian airline. They disappeared for a while, but we eventually did find something. Did we have any clues in the days beforehand where those planes might be?
Not really. In the case of the Air France Flight 447 off the northeast coast of Brazil, it did take 5 days to find the first debris and up to 2 years to find the first black boxes. The difference between that crash and this Malaysian incident is that the Air France plane was off radar. They kind of knew the approximate position. But in the case of the Malaysian plane, it was still on land-based radar, sending back signals and then just vanished. So again, to me, it does sound like some catastrophic incident, because if there were, today there was experts talking on a variety of outlets talking about, the airplane had 7 hours of fuel. If there was a terrorism or there's a hijacking, it could have gone 7 hours any direction, or the potential scenario that there was oxygen deprivation on the airplane causing an incapacitation of the crew. That happened in 1999 with golfer Payne Stewart in his Learjet.
I remember that.
4.5 hours traveling with no communication, and it went down. 2005, a Greek jetliner, Boeing jetliner, same sort of thing. But if that happened to this Malaysia aircraft, in theory, it would still be showing up on radar someplace.
Let me ask you about the search right now, because they've now taken it to an area that's about 100 miles away from its last appearance with a detection device. What does that indicate to you? Because we've heard everything from the idea that they were trying to turn around and go back to where they came from, to the fact that, this could be something that individual just mentioned.
Sure, let's face it, an airplane of this type could be traveling at about 15 kilometers per minute. So now over water, talking to pilots I know, they're supposed to put a position report in every 5 to 10 minutes. So let's say 10 minutes went by since the last voice call-in. That could have taken the airplane 150 kilometers any direction. If it did go down, as an example, over land, that's a challenge as well, because satellites can't necessarily penetrate some of the depth of the jungle foliage in that part of the world. Something that interesting came up yesterday was that the U.S. Military, which has very good satellite coverage of that area, detected no evidence of an explosion, Ryan, in that part of the airspace. So again, just as you start thinking, or I start thinking about there could have been a potential major explosion, we come back to this point that, where is the evidence of that? No debris, no evidence on the military surveillance satellites.
When we talk about the pilot, I mean, this is an interesting part of this conversation. It's the first time I've heard authorities talk about it, the idea of somebody having some sort of mental distress. You mentioned the Egypt Air flight. How likely is that in this scenario? I would think it's pretty unlikely.
Pretty unlikely, but again, at this point, the investigators can't rule out anything. Now, interesting, again, back radar is that modern commercial airliners have a transponder similar to our ETR 407 highway here in the Toronto area, which emits a signal. So if you enter the highway, it picks up your vehicle automatically. If you don't have a transponder, it'll take a photo of your airplane. Same sort of thing with this jet. These transponders tell us name of the airline, flight number, altitude, speed, direction, all that kind of stuff. But if the transponder somehow was turned off, radar would still at least be painting a picture of that aircraft. I think what it comes down to as well, a $200 million plus airliner with 239 people on board, yet there's no technology on board that can really help to pinpoint us, and that's where I sort of want to talk about further, because there's actually an affordable solution available for that.
Well, let's come back and talk about that, because I want you to take people inside the cockpit as well, as to what devices are there for the captain, for the pilot, for the co-pilot. Let's do that when we come back.
The case of the missing, what you call, or these stolen passport, there's something like about 45 million occurrence of stolen passport. Now, if you were to check every passenger against that database, it might take you some time. So we have to find out a way where we can simplify this right, to make sure that, you know, we do eliminate, I call it stolen passport.
Ryan Doyle in for Pat Baldwin this morning here on Straight Talk. You know, that is another part of the mystery that we'll get into in just a second. The idea that there were stolen passports aboard this Malaysian Airlines jet that has disappeared, along with 239 people, 239 souls that have disappeared since Friday. Robert Kokonis is here to further talk about this. And we'll get into that passport issue because I think it's an interesting part of the story. But let's talk about what goes on in the cockpit. A lot was made in the early days of this story. Friday, Saturday morning, they were talking about this distress button that a pilot can hit, some sort of distress button. It alerts the tower. They know what's going on. Does that exist? I mean, or is this something we see in movies?
No, there's that transponder again on the aircraft which identifies the air traffic control, the speed, height, altitude, name of the airplane, type of aircraft, but the pilots can toggle in a different code that would alert the ground crews to a hijacking, and that didn't happen. So there's essentially two tracking devices in an airplane. There's called an ELT, Emergency Locator Transmitter, and it's an automatic system, so if the airplane were to crash, it would go off and it would be trackable by satellite. The pilot can potentially activate that manually if he or she has enough time. Then there's the black boxes. Those black boxes just emit a radio signal. They can go up to 30 days, as in the Air France crash. It took longer than that, but they still detected a weak signal and can go and work up to 20,000 feet below the water. But there's another technology that exists out there which the vast majority of the world's carriers don't have. There's actually a Calgary-based, here in Canada, Calgary-based aerospace company, Flight Aerospace, which has a system that ties into the black boxes. Now, it can be set automatically, but if the aircraft enters some sort of unnormal flight profile, it would automatically start within 15 seconds, start streaming data from the black boxes back to a ground crew. And that's important because you can have some airlines in an operation control center, they're tracking 15, 20, it depends on the size of the aircraft, size of the airline, 100 aircraft. So this would automatically raise a lot of red flags that this particular aircraft is having challenges.
Now there's got to be a cost to that.
There is, and we know, Ryan, that the airline business is razor-thin margins at the best of times. High fuel prices always a burden on carriers. About $100,000 to put this in, but you have to ask again, in the case of the Boeing 777, there's over $200 million. You've got a lot of lives at stake. We're spending how much money now trying to find this aircraft? Is $100,000 for one aircraft too much to ask? Obviously it is, because again, a lot of airlines don't use this technology.
When we talk about the clip that we just saw about the two nationals, we believe them to be Iranian nationals. That's the latest information that has come in. Asylum seekers is what we're being told. The idea of terrorism being downplayed. Do you think it's too quick to downplay that idea?
I think it's okay to downplay it. Of course, people travel on stolen passports all the time, and of course, Canadians, when we travel abroad, we're always told to watch your passport, lock it up in a safe because it's a high in demand commodity. So they are discounting it simply based upon, and I'm sure there's a bunch of intelligence they have that they're not sharing with us at this point, but they're not totally discounting in case it is a wild card there. I still believe something catastrophic happened at altitude, and it affected both the emergency locator transmitter, and that's why we have no trace on radar or where the plane is right now.
What's your best guess on the timeline here? And I know I'm putting you in a different kind of spot, but the idea that, you know, are we looking at weeks to find this aircraft, months to find this aircraft? I mean, the internet is already abuzz with conspiracies, people talking about the fact that, you know, cell phones, passengers' families have been calling their cell phones and they're ringing, which gives you a whole new set of conspiracy theories. Is there a timeline? Because I think that the further this goes, the longer this goes, the conspiracy theorists will just get worse.
Right. Well, I mean, part of the challenge as well is that even that body of water is roughly 500 kilometers across from the coast of Malaysia to Cambodia, Thailand, but that's still a pretty big piece of water. Again, going back to Air France, 5 days to find it. I'm not picking conspiracy theories, so I like to believe that something that is explainable actually happened that we just have not been able to explain at this point. I think that possibly the theory of some sort of sudden decompression, which caused oxygen to leave the cockpit and the cabin, causing incapacitation of the flight crew, that could be a possible answer, but it still doesn't explain why did the aircraft go off the radar screen so suddenly.
For me, I'm somebody who is not afraid of flying. I mean, I've grown up flying. I fly probably about 20, 30 times a year. I know you do probably 10 times that in the course of your business. What do you think this does to the general public? Because I know if I get on an aircraft and it does, God forbid, crash and I'm killed in it, I have a confidence in the airline industry that I'm going to be found quickly. This is a new kind of, I think, shaking the confidence of the general public when we see these long spaces where planes just disappear and vanish. I think that there might be a bit more fear out there now.
Well, it seems to happen every 5 or 6 years. Even back before the Air France crash, there was an airline company in Indonesia called Adams Air, which lost a 737. Took a week to find the aircraft. So once in a while it does happen. I think that majority of the incidents out there is that segment of the population which does get a little more nervous about flying, but it tends to, as time goes on, once the incident is found, or once they find the aircraft in this particular case, and we understand the reasons behind the incident, usually that fades into the background, and the reality is we're in a big world, and air transportation is still the most effective means to get between places in two distant places. So that will likely be the reality, but again, this is a really tough one. It does read, unfortunately, like a deep mystery novel, Ryan.
Well, and that's the thing, and I think a lot of people, it is a big planet. A lot of people assume, okay, well, I'm going to be found tomorrow. I mean, if my GPS can guide me into my driveway or into a forest somewhere up in cottage country, all will be good with the world, but it's a big ocean out there, and I think people forget that as well.
It is, and these ELT transmitters, if it was working, it does allow satellites to, in theory, triangulate within 100 meters of the aircraft's location. The fact we can't do that now is a source of worry.
Robert, we appreciate the insight.
Thank you, Ryan.